Hello friends, thank you for watching this video. I am Mohamad and today we're going to be exploring ASP.NET Core middleware. On this episode we're going to be diving deep into what are middlewares, how do they work and why do we need them, and then we're going to be discussing the different types of middleware. So let's see what's on the agenda for today. So first we're going to be discussing what is middleware, what are they, how do they work, then we're going to be discussing the advantages and disadvantages of middleware. Then we're going to be going through the ingredients that we're going to be needing in order for us to build our application. Then we're going to be diving deep into the different implementation of middlewares, the different types that they have and different way of execution. And then we're going to be building our own middleware and see how we can utilize them inside ASP.NET Core. As usual, please comment your questions, clarifications, suggestions in the comments down below. Please like, share and subscribe if you like this video. It will really help the channel. So what are middlewares? Middlewares are a component assignment in the app pipeline to handle requests and responses. They are chained one after another, so basically every component will be able to decide if they want to pass the request to the next component or not. So what does that mean? It means there are pieces of code that runs every time that our application starts, and these pieces of code has specific actions that they need to accomplish. And every piece of code can have the right to decide if it's going to pass the request to the next component or not. So in summary, middlewares are components, and these components exist in our startup class, and these components have the ability to send requests to the other components. As well, they have the ability to execute logic before and after they send the request to the other component. We're going to be delving deep into what does every single of that definition mean, and we're going to see them in action and we can understand how do they work in more details. So what are the benefits of having middleware? First is going to be HTTP processing. Basically, essentially what means that every middleware performs specific actions or specific functions against the HTTP request that's coming in. And once we have that HTTP request coming in, for example, we are calling to load data, a large sum of data, what we can do inside a middleware for HTTP processing is we can actually authenticate that request. We can make sure that has the right privilege. We can do the authentication and authorization of that request. As well, on top of that, what we can do, we can add more logging. So basically it gives us a flexibility of how we want to handle the request, as well as give us more flexibility when it comes to handling every HTTP process that we might face. The second point is customization, and this also feeds back into the HTTP processing. It will allow us to create customizable middlewares that basically gonna fit our needs. Third is gonna be better performance, and this is one of the main reasons that ASP.NET Core perform way better than ASP.NET. It's because of middleware. Because basically inside a middleware we only load the information and the actions of what we really need. It doesn't really load everything inside that pipeline and basically try to execute everything at the same time, similar to what we had inside the normal .NET framework inside system.web. Basically in a middleware we only add and we only execute whatever we need, and inside a real ASP.NET application at the end we're gonna go see how are these actually being added to our application and how they are being utilized and how we can actually benefit from their performance. And lastly, they are highly async. So basically what means they can be fire and forget actions inside our middleware, and basically once that action of firing has been executed, we can actually move to the second middleware and the third one, and then once that chain goes up the ladder of the middleware that have been executing, by that time we could have gotten a response and we can build on that response. So basically middleware will allow us to execute, as we said before sending the request to the different components, and after we receive back the request from that component as well. We're gonna be delving into more details how the chaining of the middlewares work, but basically let us remember here that the async abilities of a middleware is highly effective in order for us to execute different scenarios and basically make them customizable the way we want to. So now that we have spoke about the benefits of middleware, let us see what are the disadvantages of having a middleware. So the main disadvantage is complex. So the complexity of utilizing a middleware does not really rely on the actual code that we are writing. It's about how are we going to be building them. So we need to think about on how, when we're implementing of a middleware, how does this logic fit in within the same pipeline that we have? Because if we are basically executing it inside an HTTP pipeline, we need to actually think of where we actually execute it before every component, because every component that we execute inside of the middlewares, they need to be in the right order. We cannot execute one before the other, and this is where the complexity comes in. Time consuming. It could be a bit of time consuming if someone did not work with middlewares before to understand the full logic and understand and wrap their head around the pipelines and how how every request execute and how every request inject specific middlewares into its HTTP processing. So that can be a bit confusing for new developers, but we'll try to demystify it as much as we can within this video. And lastly, it's finding the middlewares. So I remember back when ASP.NET Core 1.1 was being released, there was a lot of confusing about which actually NuGet packages that we're gonna be utilizing in order for us to build our middlewares and basically get the best of ASP.NET Core 1.1 and actually make it way more performant as it actually was. And that caused a lot of issues with trying to find right middleware. Thankfully, with the release of .NET 3.1 and 5.0 and now that on the horizon 6.0, this have gotten much more clear and it's much more easier for us to find the middlewares, but still a bit consuming if you don't really know what you're looking for, or sorry, if you don't really know where to look for every middleware that you want. So now let us discuss the ingredients that we're going to be needing in order for us to actually discover middlewares and actually build some of our middlewares. So the first thing we're going to be needing is Visual Studio Code, and it's going to be our code editor. The second thing is going to be .NET 5 SDK, and this is going to be basically our SDK for us to build our ASP.NET Core application. You can find the links on the screen here and in the description down below. So now let us jump into the code and start creating our first application, and from there we can actually explore the middlewares and understand how they work. So the first thing that we're going to be doing here is we're going to be creating our web application. And once we create our web application, we're going to be diving deep into it and we can understand the different components. So first of all, we need to make sure that our .NET SDK has been installed successfully. And for us to do that, we're going to be utilizing .NET version keyword. So .NET --version, and we should see a number here. And luckily we can see 5.0.400, which is going to be the latest version of .NET SDK on my machine right now per of this recording. If you see any other number, that should be fine. If you see any other error, you need to re-download and install the .NET SDK again. Now once we have done that, now we need to create our application, and for that we're going to be utilizing the .NET New SDK. So .NET New, we're going to be basically creating now a web application, and we're going to give it a name and we're going to call it test app. And basically what we're doing now is we're creating an ASP.NET Core empty application. And once this application has been created, let us open it in ASP.NET Code, in Visual Studio Code. Great. So the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be opening our terminal. So inside view, we choose terminal, and basically we're going to just build the application to make sure that everything is going to be building successfully utilizing the .NET build keyword. And we need to go into our folder and then try it again, .NET build. You can see it's building, and building succeeded. Great. So let us open our application, and we can see here we don't have anything inside our app. We don't even have a controllers folder. It's a purely empty web application. The only thing we can see here is we have our startup class, we have our programming class, and basically we have our test app.cs project, which is going to be our solution project, as well as we have our configuration app settings here. Great. So let's open our programming class first, and inside our program class, what we can see here is basically we are calling the ASP.NET application, and basically what we're doing is we are bootstrapping the startup class in order for us to configure our ASP.NET application. So let us see the startup class. If we open it, the startup class is very simple. Basically we have two methods inside our startup class. The first one is configure services, and the other one is configure. So basically configure services mean here if we want to add any services that we want, we can configure them there. And inside the configure services, which is the one we're going to be focusing on today, it's going to be basically where we inject all of our middlewares and actually utilize them here. So from the get-go, we can see here that we have some code that ASP.NET has automatically added for us. And these are basically the basic middlewares that ASP.NET need in order for us to run. So this is out of the box, we didn't do anything. ASP.NET, once we created that application, decided that there's some middlewares that we have, and basically they created it for us. which is completely fine. So first of all, let's start and run our application and see what do we get. So .NET run. Perfect. The application is now building on port, is built on localhost port 5000 and 5001 for HTTPS. Now let's open it in our web browser. Great. So the first thing we're going to be doing, we're going to go to localhost 5000, and we can see that we have our hello world message popping up. So let's go back to our Visual Studio Code, and inside Visual Studio Code we can see here that we have this hello world coming out of use endpoint, and then we have something called endpoint.mapget, all of those, and then we have it. So out of the box, what we can see here, we can see that the request has been intercepted somehow here. We're going to delve into more details, but basically the request has been intercepted, and then once it has been intercepted, we have seen this message. To make it easier for us, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be removing all of this. We don't really need it right now. We're going to have like a clean slate. And here it's already empty. Let us stop the application, run it again. And let us run the application again in our web browser. And let's refresh. And we can see that there's a 404, basically because once the request comes here inside our configure, there's nothing, or there's no configuration for us to handle it. So ASP.NET will say, okay, since there is no configuration inside our configure method here, I'm just going to give a 404 because there's nothing for me to do, which is the expected behavior. So once we have done that, and once we have seen that there's a 404, now let us build some of our middlewares and see how we can actually handle the request that's coming in. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to be adding is going to be a simple middleware. And how are we going to create a middleware since we don't even know how to utilize them? We're going to go through them step by step. So basically, as we said, a middleware is just a piece of code that we have inside our HTTP pipeline, and basically it executes. That's all it is. Okay, so let's start first by creating the app. So basically app is our application builder, and basically here everything that we want to configure inside the configure method, it has to go through the app. So let's go first with the app, and then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be executing the word run. So what does that run mean? Run, basically it's a extension method, and basically that extension method will take delegates. And if you didn't watch my previous video about delegates, I will link it here in the upper right hand side. But basically delegates are methods that can take other methods as parameters. And basically right now run is basically a method that allows us to utilize delegates. And from this point we can see that how middlewares are be able to help us in order to create what we want to do inside our HTTP pipeline. So app.run, and we can see it takes a parameter because basically it's a delegate, as we said. And what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be creating an anonymous method, and that method is going to be basically giving us what we want, or basically we're going to add the logic that we want into it. And we're going to be creating a generic anonymous method just so we can actually see it work. So the first thing we're going to make it is going to be async, and then we're going to give it C for context, and then basically await C, which is the context dot response dot write async. That's why we put the async, and then we're gonna just send a message, welcome to middleware. It seems very simple, but let us see what happened here. So the first thing that we did is we put the app word, and basically app is our application builder. And then we utilize the word run. Run, as we said, it is in middleware, or basically it is a method that allows delegates, and that way we can actually execute our middleware inside of run. There is different methods that we currently we can use, but now we're gonna stick with run because it's the simplest one, and then we can build from that moment forward. So we put app.run, and then basically run is expecting a middleware, or a delegate, sorry, and that delegate right now what we did is we have created an anonymous method, and that anonymous methods mean here we're only gonna be outputting stuff to the user. And basically what we're doing here, basically because we're writing async, we need to have async and await, and then basically we have creating an instance of the context that we have, and then we attach the response to the context, and then basically we're writing to that response, welcome to middleware. Now let's execute this. Let's stop the application, and now let's run it again and see what happens. So now that the application has built successfully and running, let's go back to our web browser and let us refresh. And now we can see that we have our message, welcome to middleware, popping up. So why is this working, and how does this even work? So basically, let's go back to our Visual Studio Code and let us examine what's happening here. So once we have executed our application, and basically we went into the web browser and we hit enter or to load this web page, the request has come here to the configure method. And inside this configure method, what happened? The request has been inside the app here, the application builder, and then the requests saw that we have a method, or basically a delegate method, a method that takes a delegate, and it's telling us that we have something inside that delegate that needs to be executed, which in our case is an anonymous function. So that's why it worked, because basically this is the only thing that we have inside our startup, inside our configure method. And basically we have the app.run, which basically initiate a delegate, and the delegate for us is going to be the middleware, which is going to be an anonymous function. And now inside that delegate, what we put is we just output it back to the screen, welcome to the middleware. So once we have done that, we can now see that our application is actually doing something and not giving us the 404 that has been giving us before, because basically the application builder has some kind of action for it to execute. If we didn't have that, let's comment this out and run this again, and then run our .NET run again, and go back to our web browser and run this. Oh, sorry, I didn't save. Let's run this again. Let's go to our web browser and refresh, and we can see we got a 404 because once that request hit the configure, there was nothing for us to execute, so it got a 404. But now, because we have one thing to execute, which is this, it didn't give us the 404, it actually shows us a response. Great. So now that we have seen like a very basic middleware, which basically it automatically attaches itself to the pipeline and show us back a message. So now we have tested out the app.run. Now let us see what other types of method that we have in order for us to run middlewares. So basically the request delegates, or the middlewares that we have, can be executed in three ways: app.run, app.use, app.map, and two extension methods from app.use and app.map, which is going to be app.use1 and app.map1. We're going to be delving more into the app.use and app.map as we go. Now let's start first with the app.run. What is it? So basically app.run means it only receives a context parameter and it does not know about the next middleware. So these delegates are basically called terminal delegates because the request ends with them. So that's mean that, let's say, as we said before, a delegate can actually communicate with other delegates. And in order for us to execute this and allow a delegate to communicate with the other one, we need to use app.use or app.map. We cannot really utilize the app.run because the app.run is called a terminal delegate, which means that it terminates the request with it. So it does not give us the ability to send the delegate to the other delegates. As well, it's more of a convention for us to utilize the run method to indicate that we are at the end of a pipeline. Now let us add another delegate into our application and see how this works. So first of all, we have this delegate that we have created before, and now let's add another delegates. Gonna put app.run, and basically we're gonna be utilizing the same thing, async. We're gonna call the context, and we're gonna be basically calling the await, and we're gonna put, for example, c.response.write async, and then we're gonna say I am the second delegate, for example, which is also an anonymous function. And then we're gonna stop this, and then we're gonna be basically run it again. And now let's go to our web browser, and now let's refresh this. and we can see here that the only thing which is showing us is welcome to middleware. It's not showing us the second one afterwards. Why is that? Because let's go back to Visual Studio Code, because once that request hit the configure, the app builder went and checked we have a first delegate, and it checked that it has the run in it. And basically run, as we said, it's a terminal delegate. Let's say here it does not pass the request to other delegates. So basically, because run is a terminal delegate and does not pass the request to other delegate, the request pipeline ends here. So no matter what else we have here, it has been automatically ignored by our application. Now let's switch it up and see if we run this before what happens, because here, as we said earlier, ordering really matters. So let's save this, and now let's stop the application and run it again. And now let's go back to our web browser and let's hit refresh, and as we can see, we have I am the second delegate. We did not see the first delegate. Why is that? Because the second delegate here, which is gonna be welcome to middleware, is after the first one, and basically because both of them have run, and basically, as we said before, run is a terminal delegate, so it does not pass the request to the other one. That's why it has stopped. So the main idea of a middleware is the ability to chain middleware behind each other, and basically to process this request as they come. And in order for us to do that, we're gonna be, instead of utilizing the app.run, we're gonna be utilizing the app.use. And basically right now, if we put use and let us change this method, we create another anonymous method, and within this anonymous method, let's make it like this. So let's remove this, and we're gonna basically pass the context, and we can see here that not only it's gonna require a context, it's gonna require the next. And basically the next method here, and we're gonna go into what is it. It basically allows us to send the request to the next middleware. And once we've done that, let's open this, and inside our anonymous function, first we're gonna just adding a console.writeLine, and inside this console.writeLine we're gonna say that let's for example say middleware 1 started, and then what we're gonna do, we're gonna send a response back, so we're gonna put await, and since we already said context, so let's use the word context as our context, and basically we're gonna attach to the response, and then we're gonna write async, and then basically we're gonna send a message. This is the first middleware, put 1 for example, and then what we're gonna be doing, because this is a app.use, so it has to send the request to the other middleware, we're gonna put await and next. And you might think to yourself, okay, what's next? We just created it here. Let us hover here on top of the use method and see what does it take. So we can see here from that description that it takes two things. First, it takes a HTTP context, and the second one, it takes a function. So we have, and if we go here, I think we can see the overload parameters that it provides us. Yes, so if we go up, we can see it takes a function request as a middleware, and it takes, so there is two ways that we can actually override the constructor for this method. So right now what we're doing here is basically inside this anonymous method we have the context. As we can see, it's an HTTP context, and the next is a function, and basically the function here means we are calling the next delegate to it. That's what it means. So the function here is this anonymous func, and this we have already covered back in the delegate video. If you haven't watched it, I highly suggest that you go watch it. But basically a func is a delegate, and basically here what we're saying is we have a func that returns a task, which means it's an async func, and basically what it means that when we do await.func, it means that because we are utilizing it inside the app.use, it's going to automatically call the next delegate. So we can call this instead of next, like, I don't know, AAA, and we can make it AAA here, and it will automatically call the one after. But out of convention, instead of utilizing any random name for it, what we're doing is we're calling it next, because that way we understand that it's going to be calling the next delegate afterwards. So let us save this, and now let's stop the application and run it again. And now let's go back to our web browser and let's refresh, and we can see here that this is the first middleware one, and welcome to middleware. And we can see that we are getting both answers. So we have first, this is the first middleware, and welcome to middleware. Let's put a breaking line, and let's save this and let's run this again. Perfect. Now let's go to our web browser and let us run it again, and we can see here that this is the first middleware one, which is the first message that we have here. And then because we have the await next, it automatically called the next middleware that we have, which is the app.run, and then basically when it run that, it showed the message welcome to middleware, and then it basically showed us the response. So that's good. So let's go back to Visual Studio, and we can see here that, as we said before in the definition of the middleware, that it executes logic before calling other middleware and after calling the other middleware. So what we're doing, here, in order for us to illustrate the logic that it's being executing, we have added the console.writeLine to see like a sample logic that we have. And what we're going to be doing here is we're going to copy this, and we're just going to say middleware one ended, so we can see if it's actually executing the logic afterwards. So let's save this. And we can see here we have already got the first message. Let's stop this application, run it again, go back to the web browser, refresh it, and we can see this is the first middleware, welcome to the middleware. This is what we're expecting. But now let us see in the console.log. And inside the console.log here inside the terminal, we can see that we have middleware one started, has been shown, and then we have seen that console.middleware middleware one ended, which means like once we have executed this, it went down, it looked for the second middleware using the await.next. After it has looked to the other middleware, which is going to be this, it has executed this, and then it returned back to the same stack that it was in, and then it continued executing the logic, and then it completed the application. So basically it stacked one after another. We're gonna see it in more details in a diagram afterwards, but now let us understand it through those console.writeLine that we have. So let us make it a bit more complicated. So what we're gonna be doing is, let us copy this, and let us add another middleware here, and instead of middleware one, we're just gonna call it middleware 2, and middleware 2. So now we have three middlewares. Two of them are utilizing the use, which means that they are actually able to send the request from one to another one, and the last one is utilizing the run, which is, as we said, it's a terminal middleware with all the requests stop here. Okay, so I'm going to call this welcome to the, let's change this, terminal middleware. Okay, let's stop this application, and now let's run it again, and let's go here, and now let's refresh. Oh, and let's add this on a new line so it will be easier for us to see. And now let's run it again, and now let's refresh this, and we can see this is the first middleware one, this is, oh, let's call this second middleware. Save, let us stop, let us run, let us refresh, and we can see this is the first middleware one, this is the second middleware 2, and we have welcome to middleware, terminal middleware. Perfect. This is the behavior that we are expecting. We have use, which is basically coming here and calling the first middleware, executing the response back to the, writing back to the response, then executing middleware 2. Middleware 2 is starting, then it's also attaching back the response, and then basically what we have here is the next, which is calling the terminal middleware, showing that it's terminal, and then basically going back up the chain. And how can we verify that? We can see it through the logs that we're seeing. So basically we can see that middleware 1 has started, which is here, and then after it has routes back to the response, it has started calling the middleware 2, which is here. And then once it has started calling middleware 2, it wrote back the response as well, and then basically it ended middleware 2. Why is that? Because it has the next middleware after middleware 2 was the terminal 1, and because it's a terminal 1, it doesn't call anything, and because we also don't have anything. But we're gonna see this right now once we switch the order of these, because we said ordering is very important. But for now, let's continue on this journey. And since middleware 2 has ended, and now it goes back up the chain, middleware 1 has ended, and now the application has completed, which is basically the behavior that we're expecting. Great. Now let us stop this, and what we're going to be doing here is we're going to take the app.run, and let's copy this, and we're going to change the order. So basically what we're going to be having here is we're going to have app.use, which is going to be the first middleware. We're going to have the terminal middleware, and then we're going to have the second middleware. And if our code is correct, we should not see this, because this is going to be the third middleware, and because this is a terminal 1, it will not be able to call it. So let us save this, and let us run our application. And once we run our application, let's go back to our web browser, let us refresh, and we can see this is the first middleware, and then we have welcome to the terminal middleware. Why is that? Because as we said earlier, ordering is very important, and basically what happened here is we have app.use, and basically it's calling the first middleware, and it have called the console.writeLine. We're writing to the console, then it wrote to the response, and then the await.next is calling the second middleware. But the second middleware, it's utilizing the app.run, which is a terminal 1, which is not gonna be calling the third middleware. So the request starting going back up the chain and showing us the middleware has ended, and we can see in the console.writeLine which the result that we are expecting. Great. So let us go back to the slide so we can see what's going on with the flow of the middlewares. Now let us see the flow that we have here, and let us discuss what's happening. So first of all, we can see 1 will represent the HTTP request coming in, and then basically what's happening is middleware 1 is intercepting that request. We have some logic we're executing. In our previous case, it was console.writeLog, and then we have the next, and the next basically here is responsible for calling the next middleware, and then we can see the request is passing through again to the second middleware, and once it has reached the second one, it has executed different types of logic, which again it was console.writeLine in our case, and then once it has done that, it has called the next method, and then the next method called the third middleware, and in our case right now the middleware was a terminator middleware because it cannot call the next middleware, and once that has happened, it goes up the chain, so it sends back the request to middleware 2 request executes some logics, and then after middleware 2 has completed finishing its logic, it sends a request back to middleware 1 execute more logic, and then based on that finally it sends a request back to the HTTP pipeline, and then it gets terminated. So we can see here that how middleware can be attached to one another, and basically how logic can be executed before and after. So before here, before we actually the request starts, so we have received that request, we have executed the logic, then we send back to the middleware, and only we execute the after is after all of the middleware have executed, and we are basically receiving back the request from the middleware that we have sent the request back to. We actually execute the middleware, and then we can see it goes back to our pipeline. So that flow of information is really important when we are trying to create our middleware and understand how do they work and understand the flow of them. So this is come also with a bit of complexity, and if we are creating a very complex app with a very complex middleware integration, but if we create it step by step and we understand every middleware what does it do, it's gonna be way more easier for us. So that's the first view that we wanted to share. The second view is a bit more condensed, but it makes more sense, or basically not more sense, it makes more of a, if you're a visual person, you'll be able to understand it a bit more, because here we can see that how they are changed to one another. So we can see here the green one is the first middleware, and it has the logic and the next, and then it sends it to the second middleware, and then we can see how they are like a triangle or like a pyramid. They are chained on top one of each other, and then once it goes all the way to the top, it goes all the way back down, because basically that way we make sure that we have covered all of the middlewares. And always the last middleware that we have is gonna be a terminator middleware, and that's why we only have one on that terminator middleware. We sending the request back down the pyramid, or basically back down to the flow of the request. So here we have received the request one from the HTTP pipeline. We executed some logic, it went to the next actually looked for the second middleware, which was here, and then that second middleware executed some logic, and then it has the next one, so it called the second middleware. And then once that has been completed, it reached the terminator middleware, which is middleware 3 here, executed some logic, and then the terminator middleware sent back the request to middleware 2, executed some logic, middleware 2 finished executing its logic, and then sent back the request to middleware 1. Middleware 1 could executed some logic here, and then it sent back the request to the application pipeline. So as we said before, utilizing the app.use, it means that we're not actually it's not, when we use .use or .map, we are not doing a terminator middleware. Only when we're utilizing the app.run, it's going to be a terminator middleware. Now let us discover more how we can build our own middleware. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. And now here we have seen that we have created some inline middleware. They are basically anonymous functions that we are currently utilizing them inside our startup class. But if we want to tidy up our code, there's two ways that we can actually utilize in order for us to create our own custom middlewares, which is not going to be anonymous classes. So let's see how we can do that. So the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a folder in our application, and we're going to call this folder, let's call it here, we're going to call it extensions. You can call it whatever you want, I just like to call it extensions. Extension, if I can type. Okay, great. So now that we have created this folder, inside this folder we're going to create a class, and inside this class we're going to just call it app culture middleware. So what is this middleware going to be doing? Basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking the culture that is passed within our request, and we're just going to be saving it. That's it. We're not going to be doing anything with it. We're just going to be processing it and taking it. And we're going to be doing that whenever we're doing any calls and in the HTTP pipeline. So how are we going to be doing that? So we have here a class. And basically this is going to be the first way we can create a middleware, but there is another way we're going to be delving into it after we finish with this one. So the first way we can do it is create a class, and then basically what we're going to be doing is we create a request delegate. And this request delegate means that we're going to be adding all of what we want into, basically we're going to be configuring in a certain way our class in order for it to be able to communicate with other middlewares. Let's do it and we'll explain it step by step. So the first thing is going to be private, and it's going to be read only, and it's going to be request delegate, and we're going to call it underscore next. Now let's fix those references, and basically here what we're doing is we are creating a request delegate, and then utilizing the constructor, which is going to be, we're just going to be initializing this request delegate, and we're going to be calling the next, and then here it's going to be underscore next equal next. And how is this defined? Basically we are utilizing dependency injection for ASP.NET Core to actually able to initialize the request delegate that's coming in. So right now, just a quick summary, we have just created a request delegate and we have initialized it through the constructor, and we basically utilize the dependency injection for us to actually build this request delegate. Once we have done that, the next step for us is we need to create a method that has the invoke async keyword as its name. So we're going to put public async. It has to return a task. It has to return a task, if I can type, and then it has to have the name invoke async, and then basically what we're going to be passing to it is something really cool, which is going to be the HTTP context, and we're going to call it context. So right now I think you can start to see the resemblance. When we were creating our anonymous function, we had the context as well as we had the next, which was our request delegate, and what we're doing here is we're creating a complete class which has its own context as well as the request delegate. So once we have created those, now we all we want to do is we're going to add our logic inside the invoke async, and basically we're going to utilize whatever logic that we have here in order for us to handle the culture. So what we're going to be doing is we're just going to call var culture query, and basically we're going to request from the context dot request dot query, and we're gonna be actually now requesting the culture. So what we can do is gonna make it like this, which is better. We're just gonna make it culture, and then basically we're just gonna check. So if string dot is not null or empty white space, we're gonna call it culture query, and if it's not, what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna saving this culture inside our culture information. So var culture equal new culture info. Let's save that. Let's fix those references, and basically we're gonna pass the culture query that we have, and then lastly it's gonna be culture info dot current culture equal culture, and gonna be culture info dot culture UI. It's gonna be culture. Simple as this. And basically after we execute the logic, as we have said before, because it's a middleware and we need to send that middleware to the one afterwards, we're gonna have to utilize the request delegate in order for us to pass that request from one delegate to another, and for that we're gonna be sending the await next, and we're gonna pass the context into it because we want to pass the HTTP context that we have. So right now here what happened, we have created a class, and within this class we have defined a request delegate, and we have initialized that request delegate inside the constructor, and then we had a method which is called invoke async that takes an HTTP context, and once we have done that we have added the logic that we wanted to here, and then basically we have passed the request back to the other delegate afterward utilizing the request delegate, and we have passed the HTTP context into it. So let us also add here some more information. So console dot write line, and we're just gonna say culture middleware start, and let's fix those references. Let's add a semicolon, and let's take this, and now let's add this here, and we're gonna put and something we need to be wary of is where do we put it, because right now here the await .next is gonna go back to the second culture. So if we put this here, for example, it means that this is gonna run before we send it to the other middleware, but if we put it here it's gonna execute after. So that's what we wanted. And once we have done that, let's save this. So you might think to yourself, okay, we have this class, we have added all of the configuration for it, how are we going to be calling it? We're going to add this right now. So inside this extension folder, we're going to create a new class, and inside this class we're going to call it the app culture middleware extensions. And basically what's going to happen is we're going to convert this to the class to an extension so we can inject it into our startup class. As simple as that. So let's create this class, and here what we're going to be doing is we're going to be calling the ASP.NET Core Builder, and based on that we're going to actually utilize that middleware directly from there. So first of all we need to make this class static, and then here we're gonna doing public static. We're gonna return the application builder, because basically that, if we go back to the startup class and we have the app here, which basically takes an application builder, so we need to have that. And we're gonna basically return the application builder, and then we're gonna call it. So as we can see here, we can name it anything we want here we can name it anything we want to make it run within the delegate. But if we look at it, there's a certain type of convention. So here we have the app.use, app.run, and in order for us to know that this is a delegate that calls different delegates, we need to use the use keyword at the beginning of the naming of this extension method. So we're gonna call it use app culture, and then basically it's gonna be this, because we're gonna be referring back to it, application builder, and we're just gonna call it builder. And then once we have that, we can define our function, our method. Let's fix those references. Great. And now basically all we need to do is right now initialize the middleware. So we'll put here initialize the middleware, and it's gonna be return builder dot use middleware, and we're just gonna pass the app culture middleware that we have created. And once we have that ready, all we need to do is go back here, because basically he let us add it and then we can describe what happened. All we need to do is here, for example, we can just add a simple app dot, let's do it here, let's do it before the command, let's do it here, yeah. Put app dot use culture, what did we call it? Use app culture. Let's copy this. Use app culture, and let's define it like that. And it's gonna request add a reference, and that's it. So what happened here? So let us examine it again. So inside our extension method, what we did is we created an extension class, which basically attached itself to the app application builder, and that's why we have said here inside this extension class we have created a method which returns an application builder and return this application builder, and we named this extension method use app culture, because this is what we're gonna be using to call our middleware. And inside of it we just called builder.use middleware, because basically use middleware, it's allowing us to utilize our custom middleware that we have here, and then basically we just pass the middleware name that we have created inside the app culture middleware class. That's all of it. So now let's just stop our application and run it again. And now after it builds successfully, let's go back to our web browser, and now let's refresh and see what do we get. And as we can see here, we didn't get anything, because first of all we did not display anything back to the user. But let us look inside the terminal, and inside the terminal we can see, because this was the first middleware that we have, app use culture, we have culture middleware started, then it went to middleware 1, which is going to be this one, and then it went this one called this one, welcome to terminal middleware, and then it went back up the stack. Let us now add a bit of text inside the middleware so we can actually see it on display. So here let us add, we can say context dot response dot write async, and we can just type this is a message from the middleware, from the culture middleware. Simple and easy, and we need to make it await, because it's an async method. And now let's run this, and now let's run it. Now let's refresh. Now we shouldn't see anything yet, because we didn't pass a culture. Now let's pass a culture. I will put culture, I will put en, and once we have added that, we can see that this is a message from the culture middleware. Now let's add here a new line. so basically we are able to see it more clearly. And let's stop this and let's run it again. And now let's refresh this, and now we can see this is a message from the culture middleware, this is the first middleware, and this is the terminal middleware. Great. And now if we go back to Visual Studio Code, what we can actually see here, we can see that first the culture middleware has started, the middleware 1 has started, middleware 1 called the terminal middleware, then middleware 1 has ended, and then the culture middleware has ended as well, and then the request back into the HTTP request. Great, so that's perfectly what we were expecting. Now this is the first way we can actually create middleware, custom middlewares, and attach them. And we can see here from this example that although we just added a simple culture catcher mechanism, it's way more it can be way more complex than that, and it gives us much more power than this, because actually what we can do here, we can actually initiate translations. For example, we can initiate different even subsites or subdomains that is responsible for localization, so on and so forth. So that's why within this specific section of our custom middleware that we have created, first we have actually made our code way more cleaner, removing it all from the startup class and having its own dependent place. Second, it allowed us to utilize the constructor here in order for us to do some dependency injection. Let's say we want to communicate with a database, we can actually add application DB context. We can put, for example, a DB context and initialize it from here, or for example if we're utilizing the unit of work method, we can actually utilize it directly from here without worrying about it. So this is a very good way in order for us to extend our delegates and actually bring more powerful feature into them. So as we said, this is the first way that we can actually utilize and create a delegate middleware. Sorry. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be discussing the second way that we can actually utilize in order for us to create a middleware, which is going to be very, very easy. So inside our extension class, what we're going to be doing right now, we're just going to take whatever we have inside this middleware 1 here, and we're just going to pass it to the second middleware. What we have inside the first middleware, and we're just going to be passing it inside the custom middleware that we're just going to be creating it right now. So we're going to create a class here, and we're going to call it app sample log middleware. Very simple name. And basically what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be utilizing a interface, and this interface called middleware. And let us fix this. And now the middleware require us to have the invoke async method, so let's implement it. And now we have here basically a middleware that is ready for us to utilize. No matter what we do, all this middleware, because we have actually called the middleware interface, it allows us to directly build a middleware. So what we're going to be doing is, let's go to the startup class, let's take this, we don't really need it, let's delete this, we don't need it anymore, and now let's put it here. And basically the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to make this async, because we have await, and then let's fix those references. And then here for the next we need to pass the context to it. Perfect. So now we have a middleware. Very simple. Created a class, and then from this class basically what we did is we have utilized an interface, and basically what we have done is then based on that interface, what we had to do is we have to create a method which is called invoke async, which take the HTTP context as well as the request delegate. So in our previous one, what we had to do is we had to create them manually, and we were able to, for example, utilize the constructor in order for us to do the dependency injection. But here, because we are actually implementing this interface, we are directly getting this out of the box. We have added the logic that we want to add, and we saved it. But now we did not finish yet. The next step that we need to do is actually we need to register this middleware. And where do we need to register it? We need to register it also in the startup class, but it's not going to be inside the configure, it's actually inside the configure services. Basically the configure services it's utilized in order for us to register all of the custom stuff that we do, or custom services middlewares that we have. So right now we're going to call the services, and then we're going to put dot, and basically we're going to make it add transient because we want to utilize it. and then basically we're gonna pass here the middleware that we have created, and it's called it app culture app sample logs middleware. And then basically what we're gonna be doing is this. That's all we need to do. And now once we have registered this middleware inside our configure services, we can actually utilize it here, and it's very easy for us to utilize it. All we need to do is we're gonna call it here, we're gonna put app dot use middleware, and we're gonna pass the app sample middleware. So this is the second way that we can actually utilize middleware. So now let's save this, and now let's stop the application from running and run it again. Great, now let's go back to our web browser and let us refresh, and we can see we have the same response coming back, and basically we have the same logic coming back in our logs. Now let's comment this out. We shouldn't see the middleware one. Let's stop this and let's run it again, and let's refresh this, and we can see we have only the culture middleware as well. We have the terminal middleware. The first one was not there because we commented it out. Now let's comment it back in. Let's run this again. Let us run this, and we can see middleware 1 has worked again. Perfect. So once we have done all of this and we have explored the app.use and app.run, now the last one we're going to be exploring is the app.map. So let us go back to our source code, and basically let's talk about a bit first about app.map. App.map is basically the extension method usually used when we want to branch the middleware pipeline. So anytime we want to branch the request into two different pipelines, we want to utilize the app.map. Each time we use the map, it completely breaks off the original pipeline, and everything after it will not be invoked. So let's see this in action. So inside the configure method, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be mapping. So what we're going to be doing after the last one, or let us remove this terminal middleware, and let us add here, for example, app.map, and right now if we put, for example, life, so basically everything that has a path inside our URL /life, it's gonna go here. And basically what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna create something called a handler, and just to make it relevant to the life, we're gonna just call it life handler. We can call it anything we want. I'm just gonna call it life handler now. And then we're gonna utilize Visual Studio Code for it to create this method for us, and it has automatically created for us here, and we can see it takes the application builder. So we're just gonna call it app to stay consistent. And then from here what we're gonna be doing is it's very simple. All we're gonna be doing is we're gonna just add another we're gonna just return back to the response. So how do we do that? We're just gonna do app.run, and basically for the app.run, as we know, it's gonna be a terminal one, and as we know, the app.run is gonna be the terminal one. So let's utilize it because we want to terminate the request, and it's gonna be async. And then basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to pass the context. We're going to make it an anonymous method, and what we're going to be doing from here is just going to put console, or let's put await context dot response dot write async, and we're just going to pass I am your life handler. Okay, great. And also let's add console.write log, so console.write line, sorry, and we're just gonna put middleware, life middleware. Middleware started and ended, and put life middleware ended. Save. And now let's stop this and run this again. Now let's see how this executes. Let's go back to our web browser and let's refresh this. And you can see nothing has happened here. Oh, we have an error. What is this error that we currently have? Let us see. So request, it was unhandled. status code because it has already started. Completely fine, because basically we went through middleware 1, middleware 2, and then once it reached this, it stopped. Let's go here, and now let's remove this and let us put the live handler that we had. And as soon as we added this, let's go back and let us add here / and so we can see it in way more clearer. So it's a new line. Let's stop this and let's run this again, and let's refresh this, and now we can see that the first middleware has executed, the second middleware has executed, and then the live handler that we have has also been executed. And then as we can see here, the steps, we have live handler, we have first the culture started, didn't work because there's nothing in the culture. Then we have middleware 1 started, middleware 2 has started, then we have middleware live middleware started, and then live middleware ended, and then back the chain, middleware 2 ended, middleware 1 ended, and lastly the middleware culture middleware ended. So we can see here all of the change that's happening. Great. So this is basically what happens when we have the app.map. So basically we map to a certain directory, or if you want, or a certain handler inside our URL, and based on that, once it actually meets it, it actually executes it. But as we saw before, because once we didn't have the live, we only had the culture, it throws for us an exception. So how do we deal with that? Because we don't want this. So only what we can do here, and we can actually utilize the map 1. So basically it's like a condition. Only when this actually execute, or actually this meets this requirement, it actually executes. So how can we do this? How do we do that? It's very simple. So instead of having it as a hard-coded string here, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be utilizing the context, and we're going to put c.request.query, for example. Let's say request dot not response, request dot query dot contain key, for example, and live. And let's see what happens. So if I make it like this, we can see that the live handler has been executed because it automatically mapped to it and automatically ran. So this is the power of it. So basically we are mapping the middleware that we have based on a certain condition that's coming from the actual request itself. And this is, and here you can see the power of middlewares and the power of customizing and adding and chaining middlewares, how it's actually gonna be able to improve our application and give it much more functionality and basically make it much more usable. So the last thing we want to talk about is sorry, not the last thing, one thing before the last thing is also related to this, is we have also the app.use one. Also similar to the other one, the use one is only gonna be basically on certain conditions. So we can have, for example, like a predicate, like certain condition, let's say C again, for example, we can put C dot request dot query, and basically we can check for a key, if it contained for example the S keywords. What we can do is we can build a handler. We can call it search handler, for example. And basically can generate, and inside the search handler here, what we can do is we can add more logic. So let's take this, for example. Call this app, and after that, for example, we're gonna, for example, instead of run, we're gonna make it use, and we're gonna be passing the context and the next, as we have done before in the moments method. And then basically we're gonna, after this is completed, we're just gonna pass back the request, so await next. And then basically we're gonna change this to search handler, search middleware. We're gonna make it here, and then let's put this after this, and we're gonna change the conditioning, so it's gonna be before that because it has to pass through it. And then all we need to do is just stop and run it again. And inside here we're gonna put, and then we're gonna put s, and we can see that we have I am a search handler appeared, and we have the application actually, all of the flow of our middlewares, we can see them here in the correct order. And basically what we done here is we had added a condition to the use, and this condition basically was able to send the request to the second one, and basically it was able to work. So in summary, we have the app.use, app.map, and we have the app.run. So as we said, the use and the is utilized for us to pass the request from one to another. The app.run is the terminator middleware, and the app.map is for us to map the requests to a certain conditioning. And the other thing is once the request hit the app.map, it's not going to be the same request anymore because it's going to be splitting it up based on the condition that we have. So that is a quick summary of this. The last thing that we're going to be doing is, let us stop this application. Let's go back to our terminal. And what we're going to be doing here, we're going to be creating a .NET application, and just we're going to see the out-of-the-box middlewares that comes with an ASP.NET Web API, for example. So .NET new Web API. I'm just going to call it, give it a name. We're going to call it API data. Just take a few seconds, and now we have it open here. So as you can see here, when you create an API, we have automatically the controllers added for us. We have certain stuff that ASP.NET add for us. Now let's go to the startup class. So inside the startup class, we can see that there are certain stuff automatically added for us. So inside the configure services, we can see that first of all, a service has been added for us, which is controllers, which means that ASP.NET, because it's an API, it needs a controller. It has automatically added the custom implementation of middleware for a controller, and it's registering it here inside the services, similar to the Swagger one. And once it has registered the controller and the Swagger one, inside the configure here, we can actually see the use endpoint, and basically this endpoint will allow us to utilize the controllers that we have added before. As well as for the Swagger, we can actually app.use Swagger and Swagger UI. We are actually utilizing those middlewares if it's in development condition. So we can see here that ASP.NET automatically has certain middlewares added inside our application when we create a web API, a MVC application, a Razor app, or any type of applications, Blazor, so on and so forth. And these middlewares automatically allow us to do way more stuff and way more implementation out of the box without us having the need to recreate all of those. And these are out of the box middleware that we can actually utilize, and we can actually add them and customize our own middleware on top of those middlewares in a real life scenario. So in summary, middlewares are basically pieces of code that we actually inject in our startup class, and basically they are able to attach to one another. And there are certain conditions that app.use, app.map, and app.run have in order for us to use different types of middleware. And as we can see here, just so we can go back to the app.use, so because these middleware is going to be attaching to one another, we can see that all of them have the app.use, none of them have the app.run or app.map, because basically these gonna stop the execution of it. The only way we can have here is basically for the map controllers, because basically here we are calling the add controller service and we are utilizing it. But other than that, everything is using the app.use in order for us to actually be able to call the other middleware. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this video was really helpful for you. Please like, share, and subscribe if you like this video. Please add also all of your suggestions and all of your feedback in the comments down below. If you have any questions or you have any idea for a new video, please also let me know. Have a great day, and thank you very much.